Go away, you old witch. The words stretched across the gold banner in giant black letters the moment I stepped into my granddaughter's 18th birthday party. For a second, I honestly thought I had walked into the wrong ballroom. The music was loud. Crystal chandeliers shimmered above dozens of round tables covered in white roses and gold ribbons. Waiters moved between guests carrying champagne flutes and tiny lobster pastries on silver trays. Everything looked elegant, expensive, carefully planned. And right in the center of it all, hanging behind the enormous birthday cake, was that banner. Go away, you old witch. My legs nearly gave out beneath me. I stood frozen near the entrance of the country club ballroom, still holding the wrapped velvet jewelry box I had spent weeks preparing for Sophie's birthday. My granddaughter's name sparkled across the LED wall behind the stage. Sophie Carter, finally 18. People had already started noticing me. A few guests turned away quickly when our eyes met. Others whispered behind raised glasses. One teenage boy snorted into his drink before his girlfriend elbowed him sharply. I could feel the heat crawling up my neck. For 68 years, I had experienced humiliation in small doses. A forgotten invitation, a cold tone, an ignored phone call. But this was public execution wrapped in fairy lights. I'm glad you're here, I said softly, forcing my voice steady. Stay with me until the end of my story, and tell me where you're watching from. I'd love to know how far this story travels. My son Jason appeared near the stage the moment he spotted me. His face changed instantly. Not shock, not anger, panic. Mom, he said quickly, walking toward me with stiff shoulders. You came. I stared at him. You sound surprised. No, his eyes flicked nervously toward the banner. There's obviously been some kind of joke. A joke. The word hit harder than the banner itself. My son was 43 years old, a corporate attorney who billed clients $800 an hour to argue over words. Yet somehow, tonight, he couldn't find better language than joke. Behind him, my daughter-in-law Melissa approached, slowly in a silver gown so tight she could barely walk properly. Her blonde curls were perfect. Her smile was not. Oh my God, she gasped dramatically, placing a manicured hand against her chest. Who would put something so horrible up there? But her eyes betrayed her. They were glittering, not shocked, excited, like a child trying not to laugh during church. I knew that look. Melissa had worn it for 15 years whenever someone embarrassed me, and she managed to disguise her satisfaction as sympathy. It's disgusting, she continued loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. People are so cruel these days. I looked at her carefully, then at Jason. Neither of them had told the staff to remove the banner. Not yet, which meant one thing. They had already seen it long before I arrived. The ballroom suddenly felt too warm, too bright, too crowded. I tightened my grip around Sophie's gift box. Inside was a sapphire necklace that had belonged to my grandmother. For generations of women in our family had worn it on their 18th birthdays. Tonight, I had planned to place it around Sophie's neck myself. Now I wasn't even sure I belonged in the room. A young waiter approached awkwardly beside me. Ma'am, he whispered carefully. Should I ask someone if you're still part of the event? Still part of the event. I think that sentence hurt more than the banner. Before I could answer, laughter suddenly exploded near the cake table. A group of Sophie's friends were taking selfies beneath the sign. One girl pointed toward me. Another covered her mouth to hide a grin. And standing directly in the center of them was Sophie herself. My granddaughter. Beautiful emerald dress. Long dark hair curled perfectly. Phone in hand. Avoiding my eyes. Something cracked quietly inside my chest. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just a small clean break. The kind you feel before the real pain arrives. Sophie, I called softly. She finally looked at me. No smile. No wave. Just tension. The room felt strangely silent around us despite the music still playing overhead. I remembered teaching that little girl how to read in my living room when she was 5 years old. I remembered sewing costumes for her school plays, sitting through piano recitals, paying for summer camps when Jason and Melissa fell behind financially. I remembered holding her after her first heartbreak at 16 while she cried into my sweater. And now she looked at me like I was a problem standing too close to her guests. Melissa leaned closer to Sophie and whispered something into her ear. Sophie's jaw tightened immediately. Then she grabbed the microphone from the DJ. Oh no, Jason muttered under his breath. Every instinct in my body told me to leave. Walk out. Save what little dignity I had left. But my feet refused to move. Sophie tapped the microphone twice. The feedback screech cut through the ballroom. "Okay, everybody," she said with a nervous laugh. "Before we do cake, I guess we should address the situation." My stomach dropped. Several guests slowly turned toward me. I could feel dozens of eyes crawling across my face. Sophie forced a smile that looked painfully rehearsed. "Grandma," she said into the microphone, "I know you're upset about the banner." Upset. Such a tiny word for humiliation. "But honestly," she continued, glancing briefly at Melissa, "people are kind of tired of the drama every time there's a family event." The room went dead silent. Even the waiters stopped moving. I looked at Jason. My son lowered his eyes. He couldn't even look at me. Melissa folded her arms slowly across her chest. Satisfied. God help me, she looked satisfied. "I didn't come here for drama," I said quietly. My voice barely carried across the room, but somehow everyone heard it. Sophie swallowed hard. For a second, I saw guilt flicker across her face. Then Melissa touched her arm again, and the guilt disappeared. "You always make everything emotional," Sophie said softly into the microphone. "Mom says people have to walk on eggshells around you." There it was. Melissa's language. Melissa's poison. Fed carefully into my granddaughter for years. Tiny doses at a time. Until my own family no longer knew where Melissa ended and their own thoughts began. A woman near table 6 looked horrified. Another guest quietly reached up and took a photo of the banner. Someone whispered, "This is cruel." Melissa immediately snapped her head toward the voice. The mask almost slipped for half a second. Then she smiled again. Perfect. Polished. Venom wrapped in lipstick. I finally understood something standing there beneath those chandeliers. This humiliation had not been spontaneous. It had been rehearsed, prepared, designed, and somehow, that realization hurt even more than the words themselves. I slowly placed Sophie's gift box onto a nearby table. "I think I should go," I said calmly. Relief flashed across Melissa's face too quickly for anyone else to notice. But I noticed. Oh, I noticed. Then, just as I turned toward the ballroom doors, I heard 2 teenage girls whisper near the dessert station. I thought her grandma wasn't supposed to come. My blood went cold. Wasn't supposed to come. Meaning someone expected me to stay away. Meaning someone knew exactly what that banner would do. My hand tightened around my purse. And then Sophie's voice echoed behind me one more time. "Actually, Grandma." I stopped walking. The entire ballroom held its breath. When I turned back around, Sophie was staring at the velvet jewelry box I had left behind. And Melissa suddenly looked terrified. For the first time all night. And that was the moment I realized something important. This party wasn't only about humiliating me. They wanted something else. Something bigger. Something they thought I would hand over quietly. They had no idea how badly they had underestimated me. I stood there for a few seconds after Sophie called my name. The ballroom had gone so quiet that I could hear the soft humming of the chandelier lights overhead. Sophie's eyes stayed locked on the velvet jewelry box sitting beside the cake table. Melissa noticed it too. And suddenly, my daughter-in-law didn't look confident anymore. She looked nervous. "Grandma," Sophie said more softly this time, lowering the microphone a little. "You forgot your gift." Forgot. As if I had accidentally left behind an umbrella instead of 4 generations of family history. I looked at the box, then at her. "No," I said calmly. "I didn't." Melissa immediately stepped forward with a tight smile. "Evelyn." She laughed lightly. "Let's not make tonight heavier than it already is." Heavier. Interesting choice of words. Because she knew exactly what that necklace meant. 15 years ago, when Sophie was only 3, Melissa had asked me about it during Thanksgiving dinner. "How much is that thing worth?" she had said while cutting turkey. Not, "Is it sentimental?" Not, "What a beautiful heirloom." Just, "How much is it worth?" I remembered the question because Harold squeezed my hand under the table afterward and whispered, "Never tell people the value of family treasures." At the time, I thought he was being overly cautious. Now I understood. Sophie stepped down from the stage slowly, still holding the microphone. "Grandma," she said carefully, "Mom told me that necklace was supposed to stay in the family." Melissa's face changed instantly. Sharp. Dangerous. But only for a second. I stared at Sophie. "It is staying in the family." The words hung in the air longer than I intended. A few guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. Jason suddenly cleared his throat. "Mom," he said quietly, "maybe we should talk privately." There it was. The real conversation. Not the banner. Not the humiliation. Something else. Something they had been planning before I ever arrived. Melissa quickly waved toward the VIP lounge near the back of the ballroom. We already reserved a quieter room, she said smoothly. Just family. Reserved. Meaning this conversation had been arranged in advance. My stomach tightened. I should have walked away. Every instinct told me to leave while I still had some dignity intact. But another feeling had started growing beneath the humiliation now. Suspicion. Cold. Heavy. Dangerous. So I followed them. The farther we walked from the ballroom, the quieter the music became until only muffled bass remained behind the walls. The VIP room overlooked the golf course outside the country club. Floor-to-ceiling windows reflected the dim golden lights inside the room. A bottle of unopened champagne sat in the center of the table beside a stack of papers. Papers. My eyes immediately locked onto them. Melissa noticed. Oh, relax, she said with a laugh. It's nothing dramatic. People always say that right before they ruin your life. Jason closed the door behind us. Sophie remained standing near the entrance looking uncomfortable, arms folded tightly across her chest. For the first time all night, she suddenly looked 18. Not glamorous. Not confident. Just young. And manipulated. Melissa sat first, crossing her legs elegantly. Jason remained standing beside her like a nervous assistant waiting for instructions. I stayed near the window. No one offered me a chair. That detail stayed with me. Mom. Jason finally began, rubbing the back of his neck. We've been meaning to discuss something important with you. Meaning to. Not. Needed to. Not. Wanted advice. Meaning to. Like an obligation. I looked at the papers again. What is this? Melissa answered before Jason could. It's just paperwork regarding the lake house. The lake house. My chest tightened instantly. Harold's lake house in Cape Cod. The only place that still felt like home after my husband died. The porch he built himself. The tiny blue kitchen where he made pancakes every Sunday morning. The old wooden swing where Sophie used to sleep against my shoulder every summer. Melissa folded her hands neatly on the table. You barely use it anymore, Evelyn. There was no warmth in her voice now. The performance downstairs was over. This was the real Melissa. Jason finally sat down beside her. We're just trying to think ahead, he added carefully. Maintenance costs are getting high. I almost laughed. Maintenance. Last Christmas, I paid for the new roof myself because Jason claimed work had been slow. 3 months ago, I covered Sophie's SAT prep classes. 2 years ago, I quietly paid Melissa's credit card debt after she cried in my kitchen saying collectors kept calling. And now they were worried about maintenance. I was there 2 weeks ago, I said calmly. Everything looked fine. Melissa smiled. Cold. Polite. False. You climbed the stairs twice and needed to sit down afterward. Sophie looked uncomfortable again. Jason looked at the table. And just like that, I understood the game. They weren't trying to help me. They were building a case. Old. Fragile. Forgetful. Too emotional. Too weak to manage property. The banner downstairs suddenly made more sense. Humiliate me publicly first, then make me look unstable privately. I felt something icy move through my chest. Harold used to call it my quiet temper. The dangerous kind. The kind that arrived after the crying stopped. Melissa slid the papers slightly toward me. We found a buyer interested in the property. Buyer. Already found. Already planned. My fingertips went cold. How long have you been discussing this? Jason hesitated. Too long. Melissa answered immediately. A few months. A few months. Meaning while they smiled through Sunday dinners. While Sophie hugged me goodbye after family lunches. While Jason accepted birthday checks from me for his daughter. A few months. You plan to sell my husband's house without asking me first? It's not practical anymore, Melissa replied sharply. Honestly, Evelyn, the place just sits there. The place. Not Harold's house. Not family property. The place. Sophie finally spoke quietly from near the door. Mom. Melissa ignored her completely. We're trying to avoid future complications, she continued. Especially considering your age. There it was. Age. The weapon she always used when kindness failed. I looked at Jason. Still silent. Still spineless. Do you agree with this? I asked him directly. He exhaled heavily. Mom, we're thinking long-term. I nodded slowly. That hurt more than yelling would have. Because Jason sounded tired. Not guilty. Not conflicted. Tired. Like I had become another exhausting responsibility. Melissa leaned back in her chair. If we sell now, Sophie's college future becomes much easier. Interesting. Now Sophie was part of the manipulation too. I looked toward my granddaughter. Her face paled slightly. She hadn't known. Or at least, not everything. You told me this was about renovations, Sophie whispered. Melissa's eyes flashed instantly. Not now. But it was too late. The room had shifted. Tiny fractures were beginning to appear. I watched Sophie carefully. For the first time that night, she looked confused instead of defensive. And confusion is dangerous. Because confused people start asking questions. Melissa stood up abruptly and grabbed the velvet jewelry box from the table beside her. I think we should focus on positive things tonight, she said tightly. Sophie deserves that. Then she opened the box. Empty. The color drained from her face instantly. Jason frowned. What? Melissa turned the box upside down. Nothing fell out. Her breathing changed. Fast. Sharp. Panicked. Where's the necklace? She whispered. I said nothing. Sophie stepped closer. Mom. Melissa looked directly at me now. Not polite anymore. Terrified. Because she suddenly realized something. I had never handed the necklace to anyone. Which meant only two possibilities existed. Either someone stole it. Or, I never brought it at all. The silence inside that room became unbearable. Then Jason spoke slowly. Mom, where is the necklace? I looked him directly in the eyes. And for the first time all evening, I smiled. Small. Controlled. Cold. The better question, I said quietly, is why all of you care so much about where it is. Nobody answered. Not even Melissa. Because suddenly the room no longer felt like a family discussion. It felt like a trap that had started collapsing from the inside. And deep down, I think Melissa realized she no longer controlled the evening. Nobody spoke for several seconds after I asked that question. Why did they care so much about the necklace? The silence in that VIP room felt thick enough to choke on. Melissa was the first one to recover. She straightened her posture slowly and forced another smile onto her face. But this one looked brittle. Dangerous. Like glass stretched too thin. Evelyn, she said carefully, don't do this tonight. Do this. Interesting. As if I were the one creating problems. Not the woman who hung a humiliation banner at her mother-in-law's granddaughter's birthday party. Jason rubbed both hands across his face. Mom, he muttered tiredly. Can we please stop turning everything into a battle? Battle. That word nearly made me laugh. Because battles require two sides fighting. For 15 years, I had mostly stayed quiet. Quiet when Melissa mocked my clothes. Quiet when family vacations somehow accidentally happened. Without telling me. Quiet when holiday photos appeared online after I was deliberately excluded. Quiet when Jason stopped calling unless he needed something. No, tonight wasn't a battle. Tonight was simply the first time I stopped surrendering. I'm not the one who brought paperwork to a birthday party, I said calmly. Melissa's jaw tightened. Sophie slowly moved closer to the table, staring at the empty velvet box. You really brought Grandma here to sign papers? She asked softly. Melissa turned immediately. Sweetheart, this is adult business. No, Sophie replied quietly. You told me Grandma wanted to downsize. Another crack. Another tiny fracture spreading across Melissa's perfect little performance. I watched my daughter-in-law carefully. People like Melissa never panic over morality. They panic over losing control. And she was starting to lose it. Jason stood up quickly. Okay, he said sharply. Everyone needs to calm down. I looked at him. Did you know about the banner before tonight? His eyes flickered away immediately. That was enough answer. My chest tightened again, but differently this time. Not heartbreak anymore. Recognition. A mother always knows when her child chooses someone else over her. Sometimes it happens gradually. Sometimes it happens in one terrible instant. Tonight, I saw it clearly. Jason wasn't trapped by Melissa. He was helping her. That realization hurt far worse than the banner downstairs. Sophie suddenly spoke again. Mom, she whispered carefully, did you make the sign? Melissa laughed too quickly. Of course not. Too fast. Too sharp. Too defensive. Even Sophie noticed. You said Grandma embarrasses people. Sophie continued quietly. You said tonight needed boundaries. Melissa's expression darkened instantly. I had seen that look before. Years ago, when Sophie was 9, she accidentally told me Melissa called my house that depressing museum. Melissa smiled afterward and claimed Sophie misunderstood. But children rarely misunderstand cruelty. They simply repeat it honestly. Jason stepped between them. Enough, he snapped. Sophie looked startled. Not because of his tone, Because he never defended Melissa this aggressively unless he was hiding something bigger. My eyes drifted back toward the paperwork on the table. There were at least 3 folders now that I looked closely. One had sticky notes attached. Another already contained signatures. Prepared, organized, planned. This entire night had been arranged long before I walked into that ballroom. The humiliation downstairs wasn't emotional. It was strategic. Make me feel small. Make me feel unstable. Pressure me publicly. Then isolate me privately. Harold used to warn me about people who smile while cornering you. Real predators stay polite. He once told me after a business dispute with a former friend. That's how they get close enough to rob you. At the time, I thought he sounded cynical. Now I wished I had listened harder. Melissa suddenly reached for the champagne bottle. Her hand shook slightly. That alone told me more than words ever could. She poured herself a glass first. Not Jason. Not Sophie. Herself. Control slipping. Nerves rising. Fear beginning. Good. You're making this look uglier than it is, she said coldly after taking a sip. I stared at her. You hung a banner calling me an old witch. It was a joke. No, I replied softly. It was permission. The room went still again. Melissa frowned slightly. I continued. You gave everyone downstairs permission to disrespect me. Jason exhaled heavily like I was exhausting him. That part almost broke me. Not anger. Not guilt. Annoyance. Like my humiliation had become inconvenient for him. Mom, he muttered. You always take things too personally. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I nodded slowly. Your father would be ashamed of you tonight. That hit him. Hard. His face immediately changed. Melissa stepped in instantly. Don't do that, she snapped. Don't weaponize Harold. Weaponize Harold. Interesting phrase. Especially from a woman currently trying to sell Harold's house behind my back. Sophie suddenly looked overwhelmed. I need some air, she whispered. Melissa grabbed her wrist immediately. Sit down. The sharpness in her voice startled all of us, including Sophie. For a brief second, the mask slipped completely. There she was. The real Melissa. Cold eyes. Tight mouth. Control first. Always. Sophie slowly pulled her wrist away. I just asked a question. Melissa forced another smile instantly. But it came too late. The damage was already done. Because Sophie had finally seen the panic underneath her mother's performance. Then something unexpected happened. A soft knock came at the VIP room door. Jason opened it halfway. One of the country club waitresses stood outside nervously. Young girl. Maybe 22. Dark ponytail. Shaking hands. Sorry to interrupt, she said quietly. Mrs. Carter left her purse at the table downstairs. I'll take it, Melissa said immediately. Too quickly. The waitress hesitated, then looked directly at me instead. I think she should check it herself. Every nerve in my body suddenly tightened. Melissa's expression changed instantly. What does that mean? The waitress swallowed hard. There was an incident at the table. Jason frowned. What kind of incident? The girl looked terrified now, like she regretted knocking at all. But then she reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a phone. My cousin works security here, she whispered carefully. He told me I should show her this before anyone deletes it. Deletes it? Melissa stood up, so abruptly her chair nearly tipped backward. What are you talking about? The waitress looked directly at me. Then she pressed play. The video quality was grainy. Backstage hallway footage. Time-stamped from 2 hours earlier. Melissa stood beside 2 event workers near the ballroom entrance. One of them held the rolled-up banner in his hands. Even without sound, I could read Melissa's lips clearly. Higher. The worker adjusted the banner. Melissa pointed again, smiling. Then she laughed. Actually laughed. My stomach dropped straight to the floor. Sophie covered her mouth. Jason went pale. And Melissa? Melissa lunged forward trying to grab the phone. This is ridiculous, she snapped. You can't even hear audio. But nobody was looking at the phone anymore. We were looking at her. Because guilt has a face. And hers was finally visible. Sophie stepped backward slowly like she no longer recognized her own mother. You did it, she whispered. Melissa turned toward her instantly. No, sweetheart, listen to me, you did it. Her voice cracked this time. Not angry. Hurt. That hurt Melissa far more than my reaction ever could. Because humiliation only mattered to her when it damaged her image. And right now, the image was collapsing. Jason stared at the floor in complete silence. Cowardly silence. The same silence that had followed me through years of disrespect. Then the waitress quietly spoke again. There's something else. Melissa closed her eyes briefly, almost imperceptibly, but I saw it. Fear. Real fear. The waitress swallowed hard. The event staff said tonight wasn't only supposed to embarrass you. I felt ice move through my chest. What do you mean? The girl hesitated. Then she looked toward the paperwork on the table. They said your daughter-in-law promised there would be signing documents after the party. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. And suddenly, every piece finally started fitting together. The banner. The humiliation. The pressure. The isolation. This was never about family drama. This was an ambush. And Melissa had been planning it for weeks. The room stayed silent after the waitress exposed Melissa. Not normal silence. The dangerous kind. The kind where everyone suddenly realizes they've been standing too close to something rotten. Melissa looked completely different now. The polished country club smile was gone. The fake concern was gone. Even her posture changed. Tighter. Sharper. Cornered. You're seriously trusting some waitress over your own family? She snapped suddenly. There it was. The arrogance. People like Melissa always attack the messenger first. The waitress flinched immediately. Poor girl looked ready to cry. But before Melissa could continue, I spoke calmly. Leave her alone. Melissa turned toward me instantly. You think this is funny? Funny. Interesting again. Because she still believed the problem was exposure. Not what she had done. Jason finally spoke after nearly a full minute of silence. Melissa, he said quietly, did you actually arrange the banner? She stared at him like she couldn't believe he asked out loud. Then came the performance. The tears. Not real tears, of course. Melissa's tears always arrived too quickly and disappeared too cleanly. I was trying to protect Sophie, she whispered dramatically. Your mother always creates tension at family events. I almost smiled. There it was again. The rewriting of reality. 15 years of it. Tiny lies. Tiny manipulations. Tiny humiliations disguised as concern. And suddenly, sitting in that VIP room beside the golf course, memories started lining up inside my head differently. Like puzzle pieces finally turning the correct direction. I remembered Sophie's 10th birthday party. Melissa had accidentally forgotten to save me a seat near the family table. I spent most of the evening beside the catering station while strangers occupied seats meant for relatives. When I quietly mentioned it later, Melissa laughed and said, "Oh, Evelyn, you should have spoken up sooner." I remembered Christmas morning 3 years ago. Family matching pajamas. Dozens of photos online. Everyone included except me. Melissa claimed the extra pajama set arrived too late. Yet somehow every size for every guest had arrived perfectly except mine. Then came the family cruise I was never invited to. Melissa told Jason I hated traveling. Jason told Sophie I was too tired to come. Sophie told her friends I preferred staying alone. And just like that, exclusion became my personality. Not their cruelty. My preference. That's how manipulators survive. They don't erase you loudly. They slowly rewrite you until people stop questioning your disappearance. Sophie looked physically sick now. You told me Grandma didn't like parties, she whispered to her mother. Melissa's expression hardened instantly. She doesn't. I love parties, I said quietly. Sophie looked at me sharply. And that hurt. Because my own granddaughter genuinely didn't know basic things about me anymore. Melissa had been editing me out of the family for years. Sentence by sentence. Dinner by dinner. Holiday by holiday. Jason sat heavily into one of the chairs and stared at the paperwork spread across the table. He suddenly looked exhausted. Older. Smaller somehow. I didn't know about the sign, he muttered. Melissa whipped toward him immediately. Jason. But he kept talking. You said the event planner handled decorations. Melissa's face changed. For the first time all night, real panic showed. Because now control was slipping from both directions. Sophie questioning her. Jason doubting her. And me no longer staying quiet. The perfect balance she maintained for years was cracking apart right in front of her. I was trying to keep tonight under control. Melissa snapped defensively. Your mother always finds a way to become the victim. Victim. That word landed strangely. Because I suddenly realized something painful. Melissa genuinely believed her own lies now. She had manipulated reality for so long that even she couldn't separate truth from performance anymore. I walked slowly toward the window, overlooking the dark golf course outside. The reflection staring back at me looked tired. Not weak. Just tired. I thought about Harold. God, I missed him in that moment. My husband would have stopped this years ago. Harold had always seen through Melissa immediately. Not loudly. Not dramatically, but quietly, carefully. The first time Melissa visited our home after marrying Jason, Harold watched her walk through our living room studying the furniture instead of the family photos. That night he told me, "She looks at people the way investors look at property." I defended her. Of course I did. Because mothers always want peace more than truth. Now I wondered how many times Harold saw danger while I kept choosing denial. "He warned me about you," I said softly without turning around. The room froze. Melissa laughed nervously. "Oh, please." But Jason looked up immediately. "What?" I turned slowly. "Your father saw exactly who she was." Melissa crossed her arms tightly. "And yet he still welcomed me into the family." "No," I replied calmly. "He tolerated you because he loved his son." That one hit hard. I could see it in her face immediately. Melissa hated being merely tolerated. People like her need admiration the way normal people need oxygen. Sophie sat down quietly now, looking overwhelmed. "I don't understand any of this," she whispered. And honestly, that was the saddest part. Because Sophie truly didn't know how deep this manipulation went. She only saw fragments. The comments. The exclusions. The awkward tension. She never saw the years underneath it. The sacrifices. The money. The emotional labor. The quiet humiliations. She never saw me selling Harold's antique watch collection to help Jason during the recession. She never knew I refinanced part of my retirement savings so Sophie could attend private school after Melissa insisted public schools were unsafe. She never knew who secretly paid for her summer ballet program when Jason claimed finances were tight. Melissa knew, though. Oh, she knew. And somehow she still managed to call me a burden. That realization finally burned away the last pieces of sadness inside me. What remained was clarity. Cold clarity. The kind older women develop after surviving enough disappointments. Jason suddenly looked at the empty necklace box again. "Mom," he said carefully, "where's the sapphire necklace?" Melissa immediately turned toward him. "Why are you still focused on that?" Too fast again. Too nervous. And suddenly Jason noticed it too. His eyes narrowed slightly. "Why are you focused on it?" he asked. Melissa blinked. Tiny mistake. But important. The room shifted again. I remained very still. Because I finally understood something crucial. Melissa wasn't only trying to sell the lake house tonight. She expected that necklace to be part of something bigger. Insurance maybe. Leverage. Collateral. Or proof. But whatever plan she had built depended heavily on that necklace being accessible tonight. And it wasn't. Which meant she was improvising now. That made her dangerous. The waitress still stood awkwardly near the door holding the phone. "I should probably go," she whispered nervously. "No." Melissa snapped immediately. The poor girl froze. Melissa forced another smile seconds later. "Sorry," she said tightly. "I just mean, this is family business." Family business. That phrase almost made me laugh again. Because people only say family business when they desperately want outsiders to stop hearing the truth. I walked slowly toward the table and placed my hand directly on the paperwork. Folders. Melissa immediately stiffened. "Don't touch those yet." Yet. Interesting. Not. Please don't. Not. We should discuss it first. Yet. Meaning she still fully expected me to sign. Even after the banner. Even after the humiliation. Even after exposure. That level of entitlement stunned even me. I opened the top folder slowly. Property transfer documents. Exactly as I suspected. Prepared weeks earlier. Lawyer notarization tabs, already attached. A buyer's LLC listed at the bottom. I stared at the company name for several seconds. Then something cold moved through my stomach. Because I recognized it. Harbor Crest Holdings. I had seen that name before. Not on property paperwork. On Melissa's laptop screen 6 months ago during Easter dinner. At the time, she quickly closed the computer when I walked by. I thought nothing of it. Now my pulse slowed dangerously. This wasn't a spontaneous sale. This was personal. Very personal. And then I noticed something else. One of the buyers connected to Harbor Crest Holdings had the same last name as Melissa's maiden name. I slowly looked up. Melissa went pale instantly. And that was the exact moment I realized my daughter-in-law wasn't just trying to pressure me into selling Harold's lake house. She was trying to steal it. The moment I recognized the company name on those documents, something inside me became very still. Harbor Crest Holdings. Melissa's maiden name was Harbor. Not common. Not accidental. And judging by the way the color drained from her face, she knew exactly what I had just realized. Jason noticed it too. His eyes moved from me to Melissa slowly. "What is this?" he asked quietly. Melissa recovered fast. Too fast. "It's just an investment group," she snapped. "Lots of companies use family names." Lie. Bad lie. Even Jason knew it. Because Jason had inherited Harold's habit of going silent whenever he smelled dishonesty. The room suddenly felt much smaller. Sophie looked completely lost now. "Mom," she whispered, "why is your last name connected to the buyer?" Melissa stood up immediately. "Because my cousin works in real estate financing. That's all." "Cousin. Financing." Another rushed explanation. Another crack in the story. I looked back down at the paperwork carefully. Then I saw something even worse. Projected resale value. 3 times higher than the amount they planned to offer me. My fingers tightened around the papers. They weren't just trying to pressure me into selling. They were trying to cheat me. Jason noticed my expression immediately. "What?" he asked. I slowly turned the page toward him. His eyes widened. "Melissa." Her patience finally snapped. "Oh my God. Enough already," she exploded. "Do you know how exhausting this family is?" There she was again. The real version. Cold. Greedy. Angry she got caught. Sophie flinched beside the door. Jason stared at his wife like he was seeing her clearly for the first time in years. And honestly, that was almost as painful as the betrayal itself. Because no mother wants to realize her son ignored warning signs for over a decade. Melissa pointed directly at me now. "Your mother has manipulated all of you for years." I nearly laughed at the irony. Manipulators always accuse others of manipulation once exposure begins. It's like instinct. "She uses money to control people," Melissa continued sharply. "She makes everyone feel guilty." Jason rubbed his forehead hard. "Melissa." "No," she snapped. "I'm tired of pretending anymore." The mask was gone completely now. "Good. Let Sophie see it. Let Jason hear it. Let the truth finally breathe." Melissa started pacing across the room in her silver gown like an angry actress who forgot cameras were still rolling. "Everything in this family revolves around her," she continued bitterly. "Her grief. Her traditions. Her memories. Her stupid lake house." The way she said stupid made my stomach twist. Because Harold built that house with his own hands. I still remembered the summer of 1987 when he spent every weekend installing the porch railing himself because contractors charged too much. I remembered bringing him lemonade while little Jason ran barefoot across unfinished floorboards. I remembered Sophie catching fireflies beside the lake when she was 6 years old. That house wasn't property. It was history. And Melissa looked at it the same way vultures look at roadkill. Jason suddenly stood up. "You told me this sale would help Sophie with college." "It will help Sophie. You never said your family was involved." Melissa crossed her arms tightly. "So what if they are?" There it was. The truth finally, standing naked in the room. No more pretending. No more careful wording. Just greed. Pure and ugly. Sophie slowly sat down in one of the chairs, staring at her mother like she no longer recognized her. "You used my birthday for this?" she whispered. Melissa softened her voice instantly. "Soft, sweetheart." "No." Sophie interrupted quietly. "Did you?" Melissa hesitated. Tiny mistake, but devastating. Because hesitation is confession wearing makeup. Jason looked sick now. "You planned this whole night around getting Mom to sign?" Melissa rolled her eyes dramatically. "Oh, please. Don't act morally superior now. You knew we needed that property sold." Needed. Interesting word again. Because Melissa and Jason lived in a 6-bedroom home with heated bathroom floors. Melissa carried a designer handbag that cost more than my first car. They vacationed twice a year. Needed was not the correct word. Wanted. Expected. Entitled to. That was the truth. I remained quiet while they argued. Older women learn something eventually. Silence makes guilty people reveal themselves faster than anger ever will. And Melissa was unraveling beautifully. "She's sitting on a fortune while we work ourselves to death," Melissa snapped. Jason blinked at her. "We make almost $500,000 a year." Melissa ignored him completely. "That house is wasted on her." Wasted. The same word she used earlier. I noticed patterns. Harold taught me to notice patterns. Especially when money was involved. The waitress near the door still looked terrified. Poor girl probably regretted ever entering that room. Then suddenly Melissa turned toward her. "You," she snapped coldly. "How much did she pay you?" The accusation stunned the girl. "What?" Melissa laughed bitterly. "Come on. Old women like her always buy loyalty." That sentence finally did it. Not the banner. Not the property scheme. Not even the humiliation downstairs. That sentence. Because after everything I had done for that family, after all the sacrifices, Melissa genuinely believed kindness only existed as manipulation, which meant she had probably never loved any of us at all. Not Jason, not Sophie, not even herself. Only advantage, only leverage, only ownership. I suddenly felt exhausted. Not emotionally, spiritually, like I had spent 15 years trying to grow flowers in poisoned soil. Sophie quietly wiped tears from her face now. I can't believe this. Melissa immediately softened again. Soph, honey, adults have complicated financial discussions. You called Grandma a leech. Silence. Jason slowly looked toward Melissa. You said that. Melissa scoffed. Oh, please. Everyone says things when they're frustrated. Not everyone hangs banners about it. But I didn't say that out loud. I simply watched. Because now something important was happening. Sophie's memories were rearranging themselves. I could practically see it. Every awkward holiday. Every exclusion. Every strange comment. Every moment Melissa explained away. Suddenly the pieces no longer fit the old story. And once people start questioning a manipulator's version of reality, everything collapses fast. Jason walked toward the window and stared out into the darkness. I defended you for years, he said quietly. Melissa's eyes widened slightly. Dangerous moment. Because manipulators can survive public embarrassment. But losing their main enabler? That terrifies them. You think your mother's innocent? Melissa shot back instantly. She judges everyone. Jason turned slowly. She paid our mortgage during COVID. Melissa froze. Sophie looked up sharply. What? Jason laughed bitterly. Yeah. Funny story. Sophomore grandma saved the house you grew up in. Melissa immediately interrupted. We paid her back. Jason looked at her. Long silence. Then, no, we didn't. That one landed like a gunshot. Sophie's face completely changed. Because now the story she grew up hearing no longer made sense. The burden had secretly carried everyone. The dramatic old woman had funded their lives. And the people humiliating her tonight were standing inside a life partly built by her sacrifices. Melissa realized the shift immediately. Panic flashed across her face again. You're all twisting this. No, I said quietly for the first time in several minutes. The truth is finally catching up. Melissa stared at me with open hatred now. Not irritation, not annoyance. Hatred. And honestly, that finally freed me. Because for years I kept hoping she secretly loved this family underneath her behavior. But no, she resented us. Resented our history. Resented Harold's influence. Resented every emotional bond she couldn't control. The lake house wasn't just property to her. It was competition. Proof that something existed before her. Something she could never fully own. And people like Melissa cannot tolerate emotional territory they don't dominate. Then came the knock at the door. 3 slow knocks. Everyone turned. Jason opened it carefully. A man in a dark navy suit stood outside, holding a leather briefcase. Mid-60s. Silver hair. Sharp eyes. The second I saw him, my pulse slowed. Because I recognized him instantly. Melissa looked confused. Jason frowned. But I knew exactly who stood in that hallway. Arthur Bennett, Harold's attorney. And judging by the expression on Melissa's face, she had absolutely no idea he was coming. The second Arthur Bennett stepped into that room, Melissa stopped breathing normally. I noticed it immediately. Tiny things reveal panic. The stiff shoulders. The shallow inhale. The eyes calculating exits. Arthur closed the door quietly behind him and removed his gloves with the calm patience of a man who had spent 40 years watching wealthy families destroy themselves over money. He looked older than the last time I saw him, but his eyes were still razor-sharp. Evelyn, he said warmly. I apologize for the delay. Melissa looked completely confused. Jason looked worse. Because unlike Melissa, my son recognized Arthur instantly. And judging by the color draining from his face, he suddenly remembered something very important. Arthur Bennett did not appear accidentally. Not ever. Mr. Bennett, Jason said carefully. Arthur nodded once. Jason. Then his eyes moved toward the paperwork spread across the table. The silence that followed felt dangerous. Melissa recovered first. Of course she did. People like Melissa survive through confidence. Even fake confidence. I'm sorry, she said stiffly. But this is a private family conversation. Arthur gave her a polite smile. No, he replied calmly. It became legal the moment property transfer documents appeared. That hit her hard. I saw it in her jaw immediately, because suddenly the game changed. This was no longer emotional manipulation inside a family. Now there was a witness. A professional one. Melissa crossed her arms. Well, Evelyn hasn't signed anything. Arthur slowly placed his leather briefcase onto the table. No, he said quietly. And she won't. Jason rubbed his forehead again. Mom, what is this? I remained calm. Because unlike them, I had known Arthur was coming. Not tonight specifically, but eventually. Harold prepared for nights like this years ago. That's the thing about smart old men. When they survive long enough in business, they stop trusting charm. And Harold never trusted Melissa's charm. Arthur opened the briefcase carefully and removed a thick folder. Not rushed. Not emotional. That made it scarier somehow. Melissa tried to laugh. This is ridiculous. We're discussing a family property. Arthur looked directly at her. No, he corrected calmly. You attempted to pressure an elderly widow into signing a below-market transfer agreement during a public family event after orchestrating targeted humiliation. The room froze solid. Even Melissa looked stunned, because hearing her behavior described plainly made it sound exactly as ugly as it truly was. Sophie stared at her mother in complete disbelief. Jason sat down heavily, like his knees no longer trusted him. And me? I finally felt something I hadn't felt all evening. Relief. Not revenge. Not victory. Relief. Because for the first time tonight, I was no longer standing alone. Melissa scoffed loudly. Oh, please. Nobody pressured anyone. Arthur calmly slid a document across the table. The country club security footage suggests otherwise. Melissa's face changed instantly. Interesting. Very interesting. Because she wasn't surprised footage existed. She was surprised someone else had access to it. Arthur continued. The event staff has already provided statements regarding the planned timing of the signing discussion. Jason slowly turned toward his wife. You planned this with the staff? Melissa exploded immediately. Oh my God, stop acting shocked. We needed her to finally make a decision. Needed. Again that word. Always needed. Never wanted. Never benefited. Needed. Arthur adjusted his glasses slightly. Mrs. Carter, he said calmly. Did you disclose to your husband that Harbor Crest Holdings includes direct financial ties to your extended family? Jason's head snapped toward Melissa again. And this time she hesitated too long. Arthur didn't even blink. Thank you, he said quietly. That hesitation alone tells me enough. Melissa slammed both hands onto the table. You have no right interrogating me. Arthur's expression never changed. Actually, I do. Then he opened another folder. And that's when the entire room changed. Because Harold's name appeared across the top page. Harold Carter Estate Trust. I felt my chest tighten painfully. Even after 3 years, seeing my husband's name still hurt. Jason stared at the document. What is this? Arthur looked directly at him now. Your father amended portions of his estate 6 months before his death. Complete silence. Melissa's face slowly emptied of color. Because now instinct finally kicked in. She realized something terrible. Harold had seen her coming years ago. Jason shook his head slowly. Dad never told me that. Arthur's voice remained calm. He wasn't required to. Melissa stepped forward quickly. This is manipulation. Arthur ignored her entirely. The lake house ownership cannot be transferred without Mrs. Carter's direct approval under independent legal counsel. Melissa blinked rapidly. What? Arthur continued calmly. Additionally, any attempt to coerce or emotionally pressure transfer negotiations could invalidate future sale discussions entirely. Jason looked horrified now. Mom, you knew. I looked at my son quietly. Yes. That hurt him. I could see it instantly. Because suddenly he understood something awful. His father trusted me with the truth. Not him. Melissa laughed. Bitterly. Of course. Of course Harold built secret protections around you. Arthur corrected her softly. No. Around the property. That line cut deeper than yelling ever could. Because it implied something undeniable. Harold believed Melissa herself was the threat. Sophie whispered quietly. Grandpa knew? Nobody answered immediately. Because yes. He knew. Maybe not every detail. But enough. Enough to build walls before he died. Melissa suddenly turned toward me with pure venom. You planned this. I stared at her calmly. No, I replied softly. Harold did. That silence afterward felt enormous. Jason slowly sat back into his chair like the room itself had become unstable. Then Arthur said something that changed everything. There's another issue we need to address. Melissa's eyes narrowed instantly. Arthur removed one final folder from his briefcase. Thinner. More dangerous somehow. The sapphire necklace. Melissa went completely still. And that's when I knew. Absolutely knew. She had planned something involving it tonight. Arthur looked directly at her. Did you inform anyone that the Carter sapphire is insured under the family trust? Melissa said nothing. Arthur continued calmly. Current insured valuation exceeds $400,000. Sophie gasped softly. Jason looked stunned. The waitress near the door almost dropped the phone she was still holding. Melissa whispered, "What?" Interesting. Not surprised about the amount. Surprised that everyone else now knew. Arthur folded his hands calmly. The necklace legally cannot be transferred, sold, or used as collateral without trust authorization. Collateral. There it was. That word hit the room like a thunderclap. Jason stared at Melissa slowly. You wanted the necklace too? Melissa's breathing changed again. Fast. Sharp. Cornered. You're twisting everything. Arthur tilted his head slightly. Am I? Then he opened the final page. And for the first time all night, Melissa truly looked afraid. Because Arthur wasn't bluffing. He had evidence. Bank communications. Draft proposals. Property discussions involving both the lake house and the sapphire necklace. Melissa lunged toward the papers. You can't show those. Arthur closed the folder before she reached it. I already have. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. And then Jason quietly asked the question that finally shattered the room completely. Melissa, his voice cracked. Were you planning to use Mom's inheritance to pay your brother's debts? Melissa froze. That silence lasted maybe 3 seconds. But it felt eternal. Sophie slowly stood up from her chair. What debts? Melissa opened her mouth, closed it again, and suddenly every single person in that room realized the same horrifying thing at once. This had never been about family. Not even close. Melissa hadn't humiliated me out of resentment. She had done it because she was desperate. Financially desperate. And desperate people become dangerous very quickly. Nobody spoke after Jason asked about the debts. The silence inside that VIP room felt poisonous now. Melissa stood frozen near the table, breathing too fast, eyes moving between all of us like she was calculating which version of the truth might still save her. But it was too late for that. Once hidden desperation becomes visible, people start re-examining everything. Every excuse, every emotional outburst, every manipulation, every lie. Sophie looked pale. What debts? She repeated quietly. Melissa forced a laugh. A terrible one. Thin. Shaky. Artificial. Jason's overreacting. Arthur Bennett calmly opened the folder again. No, he said softly. He isn't. Melissa whipped toward him instantly. You need to leave. Arthur ignored her completely. The financial records connected to Harbor Crest Holdings show significant outstanding liabilities linked to your brother Daniel Harbor. Sophie frowned. Uncle Daniel? Jason slowly sat down again, staring at his wife like a stranger. You said he recovered after the restaurant closed. Melissa snapped immediately. He did recover. Arthur calmly slid several papers across the table. According to these records, he currently owes over $1.2 million. The room exploded. What? Sophie gasped. Jason looked physically sick. Melissa slammed both hands against the table again. This is private. Arthur's expression never changed. No, he corrected. Quietly. It became relevant the moment you attempted to leverage trust assets connected to Mrs. Carter. Leverage. That word hit Sophie especially hard. I saw it instantly. Because now she finally understood. This wasn't about preserving family property. This wasn't about helping her future. This wasn't even about me personally anymore. Melissa needed money. Fast. And she had chosen my humiliation as the easiest path toward it. Sophie slowly turned toward her mother. You used my birthday party for a business deal? Melissa's voice softened immediately. Honey, I was trying to protect this family. There it was again. Manipulators always frame greed as sacrifice. Jason looked at her in disbelief. You publicly humiliated my mother to pressure her into signing property documents. Melissa's face hardened instantly. Oh, stop pretending she's innocent. That sentence changed something inside me. Because suddenly I realized Melissa still believed she could regain control if she attacked hard enough. People like her mistake aggression for power. So I finally decided to stop staying quiet. Melissa, I said calmly. She turned toward me sharply. And for the first time all night, I saw fear in her eyes before I even spoke. You called me a leech, I said softly. Inside a ballroom I indirectly paid for. Complete silence. Jason blinked slowly. Sophie frowned. I continued calmly. The country club membership was Jason's anniversary gift 5 years ago. Jason looked stunned. You paid for that? I nodded once. Melissa stared at me, then at Jason, then back at me. And I watched the exact moment humiliation finally touched her personally. Not because of morality, because the power dynamic had shifted. Suddenly, she no longer looked like the successful daughter-in-law tolerating an aging burden. Now she looked like someone living partly on the generosity of the woman she publicly mocked. That kind of reversal destroys people like Melissa. Sophie slowly covered her mouth. Oh my God. Jason looked completely broken now. You never told me. I know, I replied quietly. Because mothers don't keep score while helping their children. At least good mothers don't. Melissa suddenly laughed bitterly. Wow. Incredible timing, Evelyn. I stared at her. You think this is about timing? You're trying to turn Sophie against me. That almost made me smile. Because Sophie wasn't turning against her mother due to my words. She was reacting to Melissa's own behavior. That's the thing manipulators hate most. Consequences that arrive without assistance. Arthur quietly closed the folder. I believe we're reaching the point where honesty would be beneficial. Melissa looked ready to explode. There's nothing else to say. Arthur looked directly at her. There is one more thing. The room tightened instantly again. Melissa went still, and that alone told me the next truth would be worse. Arthur removed a single sheet of paper from the folder. Just one. Sometimes the smallest documents carry the sharpest knives. Jason frowned. What now? Arthur answered calmly. 3 weeks ago, Mrs. Harbour attempted to contact an appraisal firm regarding the Carter sapphire necklace. Melissa's face emptied completely. Not anger this time. Not irritation. Pure panic. Sophie stared at her mother. You tried to sell Grandma's necklace? I never said sell, Melissa snapped instantly. Too fast again. Arthur adjusted his glasses. You requested valuation estimates for liquidation leverage. Liquidation leverage. Corporate language. Cold language. The kind that strips sentiment away from everything human. Melissa turned toward Jason desperately now. You don't understand. No. Jason interrupted quietly. I finally do. That sentence hit her hard. Really hard. Because Jason had spent years enabling her version of reality. And now he was stepping outside it. Sophie suddenly looked like she might cry again. That necklace was supposed to come to me tonight. I looked at my granddaughter carefully. You still may receive it someday. Melissa snapped toward me instantly. Don't play noble now. I ignored her. Because honestly, Melissa no longer mattered emotionally. She mattered legally, financially, practically, but emotionally, she was finished. The illusion had shattered too completely. And once respect dies, fear follows quickly behind it. Jason stood slowly and walked toward the table where the property documents still sat untouched. Then he did something that shocked everyone. He picked them up and tore them in half. Melissa gasped. Jason. He kept tearing, page after page. The sound echoed through the room like breaking bones. I trusted you, he whispered. Melissa looked horrified. You're being dramatic. Dramatic. Amazing. Even now, she still thought image management could save her. Jason laughed once. Cold. Broken. My mother spent years helping us. Melissa crossed her arms tightly. She wanted control. No. Jason replied quietly. You did. That one landed. Hard. I saw genuine hurt flash across Melissa's face for the first time all evening. Because manipulative people can tolerate anger. What they cannot tolerate is accurate understanding. Sophie slowly stood up. I need to leave. Melissa immediately moved toward her. Soft. Don't. One word. Quiet. But devastating. Because Sophie finally sounded afraid of her own mother. Melissa froze. And in that moment, she suddenly looked older somehow. Not physically. Spiritually. Like the performance maintaining her entire identity was finally collapsing under its own weight. Then Sophie looked at me. Actually looked at me. Not the version Melissa created. Me. And her voice cracked when she spoke. Grandma. I saw shame all over her face now. Real shame. Not manipulative guilt. The genuine kind. I'm sorry. That almost broke me. Not because I needed the apology. Because I realized how deeply she had been manipulated. Melissa immediately interrupted. You have nothing to apologize for. Sophie turned sharply. Yes, I do. Melissa blinked. Caught off guard, Sophie wiped tears from her face angrily. You made me think Grandma hated us. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. And Melissa finally looked trapped. Because the entire structure she spent years building had collapsed in under 1 hour. The family narrative, the emotional control, the financial manipulation, all exposed, all unraveling. Arthur quietly gathered his documents again. I strongly recommend no further property discussions occur tonight. Jason nodded numbly. Melissa looked toward the ballroom doors. Like she suddenly remembered hundreds of guests were still outside. Guests with phones. Guests who saw the banner. Guests who were probably already whispering. And then the final realization hit her. This humiliation would not stay private. The woman who publicly branded me an embarrassment had just become one herself. Then her phone rang. Sharp. Sudden. Everyone looked at her. Melissa checked the screen. And the second she saw the caller ID, her face went completely white. Arthur noticed too. Daniel Harbor? He asked calmly. Melissa declined the call instantly. Too late. Because now everyone knew. The desperate brother. The debt. The property scheme. The necklace. All of it was real. But then her phone rang again. And this time, a voicemail notification appeared immediately afterward. Melissa accidentally hit speaker while trying to silence it. And her brother's frantic voice filled the room. Melissa, please call me back right now. The bank froze everything. Nobody breathed. The investors are threatening legal action. Melissa looked like she might faint. Then came the final sentence. They said if we don't get the Carter property deal done immediately, we're finished. Silence. Absolute silence. And in that moment, every single lie died at once. After Daniel Harbor's voicemail played through the room, nobody moved. Nobody even blinked. The silence felt unreal now. Like the entire family had stepped outside normal life and into something ugly that could never be undone. Melissa stood frozen beside the table, gripping her phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. Jason stared at her like he no longer recognized the woman he married. And Sophie, my granddaughter, looked heartbroken. Not dramatic heartbreak. Not teenage tears. The deeper kind. The kind that comes when someone realizes their entire emotional reality was built on lies. Melissa finally spoke first. Very softly. Jason, I can explain. But even she sounded tired now. Not powerful. Not polished. Just tired. Jason laughed quietly. One broken little laugh. That's the problem, he said. You've been explaining everything for years. Melissa stepped toward him quickly. I did this for us. No, he replied immediately. You did this for money. That hit her hard. I saw it in her face instantly. Because once greed gets named out loud, it loses its disguise. And Melissa had spent years disguising greed as sophistication, as standards, as ambition, as protecting the family. Now it finally looked like what it truly was. Desperation. Arthur Bennett calmly closed his briefcase. I believe this conversation is over. Melissa whipped toward him. You enjoyed this, didn't you? Arthur looked genuinely unimpressed. Mrs. Harbor, I spent 40 years watching wealthy families destroy themselves over entitlement. Trust me, there's nothing entertaining about it anymore. That line silenced her completely. Because deep down, Melissa knew he was right. This wasn't elegance anymore. Wasn't social status. Wasn't country club perfection. It was just another ugly family collapse built around money. And she caused it. Sophie suddenly stood up. I can't stay here. Melissa reached for her instantly. Sophie, please. But Sophie stepped backward. Actually stepped away from her own mother. I watched Melissa realize it in real time. The emotional control was gone. And honestly, that terrified her more than losing the property. Because money can sometimes be rebuilt. Image can sometimes recover. But once your own child stops trusting your version of reality, that damage lingers. Sweetheart, Melissa whispered desperately. Grandma manipulated this entire situation. Sophie stared at her in disbelief. You hung a banner calling her an old witch. Melissa immediately snapped. It was supposed to be a joke. And finally, Sophie looked angry instead of confused. A joke, she said sharply. Everyone downstairs was laughing at her. Melissa opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Because there was no elegant explanation left. No polished spin. Just cruelty. Raw and obvious. Jason slowly sat down again and rubbed both hands across his face. I can't believe I let this happen. That sentence hurt me more than I expected. Because beneath everything else, he sounded ashamed. Really ashamed. Not embarrassed. Not inconvenienced. Ashamed, I walked toward him slowly. For a second, he looked like the little boy who used to wait for Harold to come home from work every evening. Small. Lost. I should have protected you, he whispered. I looked at my son quietly. Yes, I said softly. You should have. He closed his eyes immediately, and I knew that sentence would stay with him for the rest of his life. Sometimes truth does that. Melissa looked furious now. Not guilty. Furious. Because suddenly she was the outsider. The room had shifted against her completely. You're all acting like I committed some crime, she snapped bitterly. Arthur answered calmly. That depends on what investigators decide regarding attempted coercive transfer practices. Her face went white again. Good. Maybe fear would finally accomplish what decency never could. Sophie looked toward me slowly. Then tears filled her eyes again. Grandma. I turned toward her. She looked devastated. I really thought you hated me sometimes. That one nearly broke my heart. Because I suddenly realized how many years Melissa spent poisoning her quietly against me. Tiny comments. Tiny suggestions. Tiny lies repeated over and over until they felt true. I walked closer to Sophie slowly. No, sweetheart, I said softly. I never hated you. She started crying harder immediately. But Mom said you resented us. I glanced briefly toward Melissa. She worked very hard to make you believe that. Melissa scoffed loudly. Oh, please. Don't turn her against me. But Sophie didn't even look at her mother anymore. That's when Melissa finally understood something horrifying. The influence was gone. Completely gone. The story she controlled for years had collapsed in one night. Jason suddenly stood up again. We're done. Melissa turned sharply. What? We're done, Melissa. The room froze. Even Arthur looked slightly surprised. Melissa laughed nervously. You're emotional right now. No, Jason replied quietly. I'm awake. That line landed harder than yelling ever could. Melissa's breathing became uneven again. You would throw away our marriage over this? Jason looked at her for a long moment. Then he answered, no, I'd throw it away over 15 years of lies. Silence. Absolute silence. And for the first time all evening, Melissa looked truly alone. Not cornered. Not embarrassed. Alone. Because manipulative people survive through emotional alliances. And hers had just disappeared one by one. Sophie suddenly walked toward me carefully. Then she hugged me. Tightly. The ballroom music still pulsed faintly through the walls somewhere outside. But inside that room, everything felt strangely quiet. I held my granddaughter while she cried against my shoulder. And God help me. Part of me still wanted to protect her from all of this. Even after tonight. That's the curse of loving family. Sometimes love survives long after trust dies. Melissa stared at us with open disbelief. Then anger returned immediately. Unbelievable, she muttered bitterly. After everything I've done for this family. That sentence finally made Jason snap. Done for us, he exploded. You tried to steal my father's house. Melissa pointed directly at me. She was hoarding wealth while we struggled. Arthur calmly interrupted. Your household income exceeded $400,000 annually. Melissa glared at him. I'm talking about future security. No, she was talking about appetite. There's a difference. Some people confuse luxury with necessity after long enough. And Melissa had crossed that line years ago. I suddenly felt incredibly tired. Not weak. Just finished. Finished explaining. Finished defending myself. Finished begging to be treated with dignity inside my own family. So I picked up my purse calmly. Arthur immediately stood beside me. You shouldn't drive tonight, he said quietly. I'm all right. Then I looked at Sophie. Call me tomorrow. She nodded instantly. Jason looked destroyed. Mom, I stopped near the door. And for several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, he whispered, I'm sorry. I believed him. That was the tragic part. I actually believed him. But some apologies arrive after the damage already reshaped the relationship forever. I gave him a small nod. Then I reached into my purse slowly. Melissa's eyes immediately widened. Because she knew exactly what I was holding before anyone else did. The sapphire necklace. Still safe. Still untouched. Sophie gasped. Softly. You had it the whole time? I looked directly at Melissa. Yes. Her shoulders dropped instantly. Like the final piece of hope had finally died. Because deep down, she knew exactly why I kept it hidden. I no longer trusted my own family around it. That realization humiliated her more than anything else tonight. I walked towards Sophie and gently placed the velvet box into her hands. Not the necklace, just the box. This belongs to the women in our family, I said softly. But inheritance means more than jewelry. Sophie cried harder. Melissa looked like she wanted to scream. And honestly, that was enough for me. I didn't need revenge anymore. Truth had already done the work. As I walked out of the VIP room, I could hear the ballroom guests whispering downstairs. Phones glowing. Rumors spreading. People staring. Melissa built her entire life around appearances. And tonight, appearance finally abandoned her. By the time I stepped outside into the cold Connecticut night air, I realized something strange. I didn't feel humiliated anymore. They had tried to reduce me to an old woman begging for relevance. Instead, they exposed themselves. Because old women survive things younger people cannot even imagine surviving. Betrayal, loss, loneliness, grief. And after enough years, you stop fearing the truth, even when it destroys your family.